GC News, Mima Obibia Akwawa. I had here latest and hot news in Kwa Enamide Bremo. Eluti, so we can subscribe here. For more than say, over subscribe to their channel. You may answer over click the subscribe button. Now, belly notification or answer the video be uploaded. When the first person I want to have a video, I feel we are while I give you to give us a thumbs up. Nafi. Shema of first room be here and say had here latest and hot news kwana mede ebremo Afriyie mbura ye ensemu ye hwe eye ensema abeto ye proso yiti ye sankume ye koso nsemu ababetu ga yiti.
Justice William Atogoba, it's good to have you. Now, with your experience searching through election petitions for that matter,
yes,
would an audit as based on what we are confronted with now, be one of the corrective measures to, as it were, satisfy all of these concerns and answer all the questions about the provisional voters register as exhibited?
Absolutely. Now, let me refer to Articles 296. 296. Exercise of discretionary power, where in this Constitution or in any other law, discretionary power is vested in any person or authority. A, the discretionary power shall be deemed to imply a duty to be fair and candid. Is that an instance of fairness and candidness? I raise plausible errors in the register, and you just tell me, I've effected the corrections. Not even, or say most of them, and that should end the matter. And you say that's fair and candid? Anyway. Let's look at another provision relating to the power of the Electoral Commission. 51. The Electoral Commission shall, by constitutional instrument, make regulations for the effective performance of its functions under this Constitution or any other law, and in particular, for the registration of voters, the conduct of public elections and referenda, including provision for voting by proxy. Their power is to make regulations for the effective performance of its functions. Now, what does efficacy? Is that an effective way of conducting an election? Serious discrepancies are pointed out by a commission which the public doesn't trust much. I don't know much about all this. I'm a lawyer. I don't have time for politics and all that. But what I do know from social media is that people, Afro Barometer says at least 1/3 of the people,
yes,
country don't have trust in the East.
So that's about 33%, I think. Yeah.
And I've read from social media that, I mean, from what they are saying, unless they are wrong, that the Constitution is mostly comprised of politically exposed persons. I mean, in the first place, the person who exercises that power, if, I mean, he is mindful of the requirement that the exercise of the power shall be fair and candid, you don't go and bring your stooges to run a national institution.
Well, it is the president who appointed these commissioners.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, that their appointment, I mean, is in the first place, is fair and candid. If it is true that most of them are politically exposed, is that a fair and candid way of, and should they themselves even accept those appointments? We are not serious. We can't be serious, and that's why we are suffering so much. People just enjoy the power without looking at the constraints.
You are watching Juicy News on YouTube.
The power around.
Hot news all time.
That's the African mentality.
Juicy News on YouTube. Hot
That's
news all
what
time.
results in Napoleonic state capture, dictatorship of the type of Mussolini, Stalin, and others. Very amazing that this day and age, all this constitutional journey since 57, we can retrogress like this. Very painful indeed. And others, look, when I was retiring, a lecture was organized in my honor. At the end of it, I asked whether I could say a few words. So, well, I can just say one or two. And I reiterated Article 1+1, that at all times, everybody should be mindful of that provision, particularly judges. And that what would pain me is that some persons can choose that clause which enables them to come to power in the Constitution, and once in power, they seek to negate all the other provisions of the Constitution, and they will get people willing and ready to help them to do so. I couldn't continue. I said, thank you, I went and sat down. This is where we are.
And I sense that level of trouble and as it were the concern about the retrogression in our democracy that you talk about. I mean, what could be the possible implications of what we are faced with, as you have diagnosed, as Napoleonic situation of the state?
Well, your guess is as good as mine. I'm just a judge, so you probably have a better background. But if you look at history, let's look at Kenya just recently. What's happening there? I think you followed what has happened there.
Yes, sir.
You saw how the president retreated so many of his powers, and although later he had to reinstate certain taxes, but you know the far-reaching this thing here. He was forced to do that. The people, look, I hardly watch TV, but by chance, you know, sometimes when I have a Sunday, I watch, I sit by them. During that Kenyan incident, a young man was put before court, and the charge was read to him. His plea was being sought from him. And he said, look, he would continue the fight without fear of anybody. And they were trying to say, oh, but you have to please that. He has no time for that. He is standing where he has come from, and there's no turning back. The police and whatnot tried it, they couldn't, as witnesses live. But we all know of the Arab
You are
Spring.
watching Juicy News on YouTube. Hot news
Beginning
all time.
from Tunisia.
You are watching Juicy News
Went
on
to
YouTube.
Libya.
Hot news all time.
Some other country, I think Egypt. It even went to Syria, although the situation there was not constitutionally as bad as
the other places. Yes.
And I saw what happened.
And you think that Ghana is at that point, we are at risk of an experience like that?
Well, that you see civil society organizations. For many years, have you seen civil the people massing up and demonstrating here now and then and insisting on their rights and so forth? Have you seen that before? I mean, it's because we have gotten to a level which has provoked that. And nobody knows how it will pan out if dictatorship, right now, I'm sorry to say, but looking at things, if we're honest, and that the importance is honesty, we're honest in this country, there's state capture of this country, complete state capture, a negation of the Constitution. It has happened.
A negation of the Constitution?
Complete.
How's that?
I mean, you are asking me, are you not in this country?
You know, you've just made that reference.
In terms of what is this Constitution being upheld? Tell me.
You don't see the Constitution being upheld in any way?
Is it freedom of speech? Is it the fundamental rights enshrined the right to economic welfare and all that. In fact, our constitution, let me read this thing. I want to emphasize it. By your time is this thing. What it says is that the most sure, the most secure economic rights is the right to a good life. I mean,
the directive principles of state policy.
Yes, it's there, black and white. I say it at United. Is that the stage we are at?
Talking about the most secure democracy being that which is able to meet the basic needs of its people.
Exactly, exactly. Is that where we are?
So our democracy is not secured.
Is that how to secure democracy? People, in fact, I get frightened when I think of, on social media, you find tanker drivers, they say they are paid 700 cedis. Some Uber drivers, 300 cedis. These people have been sentenced to death. Can you survive on this? You have no right to marry because you can't sustain the marriage. 700 is not enough for yourself. How do you pay your rent? And Ghanaians are so money-minded. The rents are high, and they don't have time for the rent regulations. Some take 3 years advance and all. I mean, a tube of yam is how much?
The least you can get is about 30 cedis, I think.
Okay. So, a person earning 700 or 300 survive under this. Now, look, even as I'm talking, I'm not above risk, but the truth must be told. I've read on social media, even some time ago, 2 or 3 years ago, a person as dignified, as high as the late, what's his name, Kweku Annan. Then he gave a speech somewhere, and he came out on social media to say that he received death threats. Martin Amido received death threats. I mean, is that a democracy? What are we talking about? We're not talking about here. Even the right to express yourself. I concede that some people too go off tangent. Right or freedom of speech doesn't mean being vandalistically irresponsible, insulting. When the case of Tommy Thompson Books Limited came to the Supreme Court, they said the libel and sedition laws were not unconstitutional because there cannot be a license to insult as one people. They repealed them, not because they were unconstitutional, but people thought otherwise and repealed them. But if that is done to advance constitutionalism, are we enjoying constitutionalism? Death threats, you see, to people who are speaking their minds, criticizing the government. This day and age, God have mercy on us.
And indeed so. First off, and I know that you've been following how things are playing out with respect to the concerns that the NDC has raised about the errors identified in the provisional register that was exhibited. Other political parties have also aligned with those concerns. The Electoral Commission says, well, they've also identified those errors, but they have corrected them. So really, there's no need for an audit. Where do we go from here?
Well, the final word purports to be that the corrections have been made, and that's the end of it. The matter ends there, as I understand what your briefing.
Yes, essentially, they say that, well, because they have done those corrections, there is really no need for an audit, even though the NDC says that they have not seen the corrections that the Electoral Commission is saying they have done to the errors, as a matter of fact.
That looks very absurd to me, and I don't intend to be abusive, but to make the point very forcefully, I think it's dictatorial to take that posture because the Constitution gives them the power, but that power is circumscribed by other provisions of the Constitution.
News on YouTube.
Let's look
Hot
at
news
their
all
powers
time.
briefly.
You are watching Juicy
Just
News on YouTube.
the relevant
Hot news all
parts.
time.
The 45 clauses A and D are as follows. The Electoral Commission shall have the following functions. A, to compile the register of voters and revise it at such periods as may be determined by law. D, to educate the people on the electoral process and its purpose. Let's even pause here a bit. Is that proper education? Just to tell people who have pointed out grievances, which you have acknowledged exist, and then after that you say that's the end. We've effected the correction. You have not seen them, and that's the end of it. Is that proper education of the people on the electoral process and its purpose? I mean, to have blind trust in the mere ipse dixit of the Electoral Commission. I say, because that said so, that's the end. That's a dictatorial posture to take. And for me, others can have their views, but looking at this Constitution in the round, that kind of situation is entirely outside the boundaries of the constitutional order put in place. The other provisions impinging on the powers of the Commission or anybody given power under the Constitution is Article 1, Clause 1. Let us always revisit that provision. It is the most important provision in the entire Constitution. It says, Article 1, Clause 1, the sovereignty of Ghana resides in the people of Ghana, in whose name and for whose welfare the powers of government are to be exercised in the manner and within the limits laid down in this Constitution. So all exercise of constitutional power is to be geared towards the interests and welfare of the people as the sovereign of the country. And I'm at pains to see how a sovereign power whose interests and welfare have to be served by all donees of constitutional power can be just dismissed outright. Oh, we've heard gone through your complaint, we've effected the corrections. And from social media, they are not even saying they've corrected all, say most of them. And that should be the end of it. To me, that is running, to use an old expression, a chase and fall, as a chariot drawn by horses in the olden days, through the provisions of the Constitution. Nobody, and I want to emphasize, nobody has absolute power that detracts from the welfare and interests of the people under this Constitution. That's a central requirement. And I'm sorry, in Africa, and particularly in this country over the years, people just look at power in absolute terms. I'm sorry. You look at the power conferred, you look at all the other coexisting provisions. They are relevant to the exercise of your power. Now, let's look at Article 3, Clauses 3 and 4. Well, this, because of your time factor, all they are saying is that every person, now, all citizens of Ghana shall have the right and duty at all times, And that's at all times, anywhere, because time does not exist in the vacuum. It must be allied to a place. And so that's part of the at all times. And so every citizen, I want to emphasize that. Every 3, 4. All citizens of Ghana shall have the right and duty at all times to defend this constitution, and in particular to resist any person or group of persons seeking to commit any of the acts referred to in clause 3 of this article. Now, let's forget about overthrowing the constitution. But overthrowing the constitution by any unlawful means, say any unlawful means, not necessarily by violence or anything. Anything that is not in line with the constitution, any means.
And that includes going into an election with an electoral roll that has concerns.
Oh, sure. It's not a provision of the constitution.
Right.
And it's part of the, and every citizen has the right at all times to defend the constitution. That even is enough. The other aspects of abrogation or so, they are all part of the constitution. So the time is constrained. Let's look at Article 41 of the Constitution, duties of a citizen. The exercise and enjoyment of rights and freedoms is inseparable from the performance of duties and obligations, and accordingly it shall be the duty of every citizen be to uphold and defend this Constitution and the law. And so, I mean, you just don't look at people in their face and tell them this is what I've done, and you have to take it like that. If it's not in line with the Constitution, they have the right to insist that you comply, because they have the right and duty to defend the Constitution and the law.
Yo, it's for winning and some more about the toy so because you see so and my work so when you subscribe here or more than so best subscribe to the channel. This answer had it later and hot news in Kwa and I'm a Prempeh Afriyie no like video no nothing share my offer for sooner when you be here now who and somewhere and koso ewo dara memoir. Also bet me actually working Afriyie and somewhere now I will comment box in in my next video.
Thanks for watching. Like and share the video. You can also drop your comment. Please don't forget to subscribe. Click on the bell to turn on the notification.
You are watching Juicy News on YouTube, hot news all time. You are watching Juicy News on YouTube, hot news all time.